So what's your risk appetite like? Well, if you find that question hard to answer, then hang on, because I'm going to explain to you what risk appetite is and how to use it to make better investment decisions. Because at the end of the day, we don't want you making an investment and then being at night time having difficulty sleeping because you're sweating away at worrying about, was it the right move or was it the wrong move? Likewise, we don't want you going to the other extreme of, being 10 years later on down the track saying, oh, I wish I had made that investment. It would have made so much money for me. Risk appetite is what drives those two extremes and also gets you in that sweet spot in the middle. So as you can tell, it's pretty well Christmas around my area of town. And I've got the holiday scruff going on and the casual clothes. So if it's middle of March when you're watching this video, don't panic too much. It just gives you a bit of context. But it gives me a good way of explaining what risk appetite is. Now think about when you go to, or you see people, I won't say you, when you see others at the family feast, the big Christmas dinner, or even at a smorgasbord. There will have some people who will find the biggest plate they can find, fill it up, consume everything on it, go back for seconds, finish all that off, and then be excited when dessert comes and eat that all up. And then at the end of the day, they're just, I'm so full, I'm ready to actually just throw up. Too much food, too much goodness. That is like an excessive risk appetite when you take too much that you can't actually handle it. Or there's the other type of person, I've got a few props today, who have a more modest plate and they'll fill that up and enjoy the food and the bits and pieces that they have. They get a little bit of everything and make sure that they leave enough room for dessert, so when dessert comes they can eat that nicely. And their biggest problem in life is they probably need to find a quiet place to have a bit of a lie down for the afternoon kip after a big dinner. It's been very guilty of that for many Christmases. And then you have the third type of person, the one that has the tiny little plate. The tiny little plate is, they'll have a little pick of this and a little pick of that, and when dessert comes, no, I'm watching my diet. I can't take a chance. Don't want to be doing a risk on that. And I think that is almost symbolic of the three types of risk assessments that you have. Now, I like Peter Lynch, and he explained that risk assessment, risk in itself, is actually more to do with the stomach than it is the head. Now, we've just spoken about Christmas dinners and lunches out, so, but he's not actually talking about that in regards to the stomach. He's talking more about the fact that you need to have an investment that is similar to with a stress level that you can handle. If you're getting to the stage where you're stressed, and like I mentioned earlier, if you're awake at night time, then you probably got yourself too heavily geared or too much risk to be satisfied with your life. So that is a good way of looking at it. It's more to do with the stomach than it is the head. Now, there's two things that dictate your risk appetite. One is the size of the risk. And the second issue is in regards to the consequence of the risk. So if you had a risk for $5 and you had $50,000 in the bank, then you wouldn't lose much sleep. That's what I mean by the size of the risk. But there's a good story I remember of from Kerry Packer. Now, Kerry Packer was one of the first Australian media moguls, kindred spirit to Rupert Murdoch, who went over and pretty well conquered the world with Fox News and the Fox network. And the story goes that Kerry was at a function, probably a banquet of some sort, and next to him was a young enthusiastic man who was just so happy. He says, I've just made my first $1 million, and he was stoked. He was so happy. And Kerry just reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin. He says, I'll flip you at double or nothing. And the young guy says, I don't understand. What do you mean by double or nothing? He says, I'll flip you. You call it. If you call heads and it lands heads, I'll give you $1 million. If you don't, you give me the $1 million. You can double your net worth in the flick of a coin. And the young guy, just freaked out, couldn't handle it. No, and that's what I mean by the size of a risk appetite. If you had $1 million and you were going to put all that $1 million onto an investment, then that'll be a sizable outcome, and it would have significant risk. And understanding risk appetite is not actually all logic. If you've been an avid reader, there's a really good book that did a lot to help me understand different ways of looking at risk, and that was called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And it mentions that if you had the example of flicking the coin again, and it was a dollar either side. So if it was tails, it was $1. If it was heads, it was $1. And if you went up to people and say, well, would you take that bet? It's 50-50 each way. And logically, you'd say, well, it's 50-50 each way. But what they found out in research is people are more scared of losing $1 than they are excited by winning $1. Even though the same probability in the case of a coin, you're winning it or losing it is the same. It should be the same amount of emotion, but it's not. People are actually more scared to lose money than they are to win money. So what you'll find is your risk appetite will be varied. Some people are happy with a 50-50 chance. Some people would have taken Kerry Packer's coin and gone for it to look to double or not, and hopefully not double, because eventually they would have lost. But there's a lot of people that would have taken that chance of throwing everything they had to get that 50-50 chance. But if he had gone to saying something like, and you see this in the betting houses and the casinos, it may be that, all right, I'll give you $1.20 if the coin goes to heads, and give you 80 cents if the coin goes to tails. Will you back heads? Now, logically, you say yes, because you've got a better return for the odds that you have. I hope this is making sense to you. If you go to a more extreme, okay, if it was $1.50, for flicking a head instead of 50 cents for a tail, you're starting to understand that the ratio, or the odds, as we would call it, is what makes the difference. And different people have different odds. Now, in the previous series that we've got, I talked about your book of knowledge, or your spirax book. Have a look at writing down, try and work it out maybe with the coin. Would you back a 50-50 chance? Or would you back a 60-40 chance? Or does it need to be 75% that you're going to get it right to 25% that you're going to get it right? And that is probably the simplest way to understand what your risk appetite is. Are you a person who takes a high risk or a low risk? All right, so hopefully that gives you an idea on how to ascertain what your risk appetite is. So what can you do to make sure it works for you when you're having an investment, be it a commercial property or be it anything investment in life? One of the things that, once again, going back to that book on Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, is there's a strong tie between risk appetite and whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. And we see this so often, especially in the stock market, and particularly in sales as well, but the stock market most likely. You see the alpha males and the alpha females, they're all dressed up, they're smick, raring to go, and full of extrovert. They are just so full of energy. They will tend to be people who have a higher than normal, I'd say, or higher than average risk appetite. And you see that all the time. You look at them and say, wow, what were they thinking when they took that risk? I remember when I was a teenager and riding bikes. If I look back at it now, I go, whoa, you got to be kidding me. We did what speed around what area? You go, no way. So perhaps age is another element in regards to risk appetite, because as you get older, you suddenly get that sense of mortality. You suddenly have responsibilities. You have a wife, you have a couple of kids, maybe some grandkids. So like I said, one of the aspects is the consequences. So as we get older and the consequences are higher, our risk appetite comes down lower. And you need to factor that in. The other side of the coin is introverts. Introverts tend to be not so much as risk averse, but they will take longer to evaluate the risk. And that's a good practice. It becomes a bad practice, however, when we have the term paralysis by analysis. And quite often that is the main reason why people won't buy a commercial property, even if it's a good one or a good investment in general. The introvert will always find a reason to say no. And remember, you need to have an understanding. If you're a 50-50 person and you got three reasons to go for it and 2 reasons not to go for it, but they equate to about the same sort of value, then go for it. If you're someone who looks more for the 60-40, well, then you need to gear it. But once you find that balance, then take a deep breath, be courageous, make the decision. Now, some other tips that I can give you in regards to making the most of understanding your risk appetite is make sure you have a plan. Now, it doesn't have to be big and complicated. It can be as simple as a couple of steps written in your spirax book that we spoke about. If your plan is to get a retail property in, I don't know, the Atherton Tablelands, and you want to have 3 shops in it, then stick with that plan. Where you fall apart with risk appetite is if you suddenly ignore that plan and get something outside that element. Now, there may be valid reasons for doing that, but essentially make sure you have a plan. And the second fact is, in all instances, if you can, is stick to that plan. Now, the rider on that is, and I've seen it before, and I've felt it before as well, you need to have some good consideration on that plan, because if your plan is wrong, then achieving it is not going to be a good result. And I've had business plans over the years that have been achieved, but then you looked at the result at the end of the year and it's not what you wanted. It is a challenge to make good plans, but like they say, if you don't have a plan, then you plan to fail. So make sure that you've got a plan in place and that you follow it. Other things that you can do is make sure that you have a group of advisors and people who are different to yourself. You don't want people who are just always patting you on the back saying, yeah, I agree with that, that's the right way to go. Groupthink is not a good thing here. I actually find it difficult, but I appreciate having advisors who have very different viewpoints from me. I mean, my accountant and I, we are like this quite often the time. I mean, we love each other dearly. We've been working together for years, but we have very different ways of thinking in regards to business. And that is good because, like they say, iron sharpens iron, or diamond cuts diamond, and you need to have different thoughts. And for me, I'm a hardcore entrepreneur. I mean, I've had 17 businesses now. I've bought them, sold them, created them, amalgamated them, de-amalgamated them, closed them, the whole gamut of it. So to me, my risk appetite is probably a lot higher than most people's. And having people who have different viewpoints, particularly like legal people and accountants, they tend to be more conservative by nature. Just the industry attracts that. So I do a lot of work and bounce my ideas, from people in those sort of fields, specifically so that they can maybe taper my enthusiasm or high risk appetite along those lines a little bit. Other things that I would really recommend is only invest what you can afford to lose. Once again, remember that the story with Kerry Packer and the guy dining next to him. He didn't want to lose everything that he had, and that's a wise choice. How much do you afford to lose? Look, once again, that's up to different people. Some people can afford to lose a significant amount more than others, but essentially, as a proportion of what you have, don't jeopardize the things that you have. Make sure your house is safe. Make sure your debt level is low when you're going into an investment mode, so that you have that sort of security to run with. And remember that it's not just you who is affected by decisions of investment. Your family is very much involved in that as well, including your children who will be watching you. You'll be surprised at how much they learn by seeing what you do in regards to investments and whether they do the same or not. I like the work from Edward de Bono. It's a classic, as I would say now, which means it's been around a long time. And he worked on a concept of having 6 coloured hats, thinking styles. Now, if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of advisors, or has friends who probably shouldn't be taking advice from, have a think of just looking at your investment from 6 different ways. Now, De Bono has a concept. He uses the imagery of wearing a different coloured hat. So if you put on a white hat, the white hat is analytics. Having a look at the facts and the figures. So your return on investment, your rate of return, what the capital rate is, how long it's going to take to get your money back, what the tax implications are, what the cash flow is going to be. All those type aspects are the analytical. And then you take your white hat off and you put your black hat on, and the black hat is essentially the pessimist. What can go wrong will go wrong. So having a think of, okay, if the economy goes pear-shaped, if the market cycle changes, remember markets always go up and down in cycles, and not like a nice easy wave like I have out the front yard here. It all goes in peaks and troughs, but in great various. So they'll have a look at what happens if this happens and this happens, and what happens if you lose your job, or what happens if you get sick. How are you going to manage that? These are the black hat thinking type aspects. Then you have, you can take the black hat off and put a green one on. A green one is creativity. How can you leverage this investment? Is this going to be the springboard to other investments for you? What can you do to improve this investment? If it's a commercial property, is there vacant space that you can do something with? Can you put some covered car parking in the open car park and charge more rent for the fact that cars are protected? Those sort of type creative ideas are what the green hat thinker has. Take off the green hat and put on a blue hat. Blue hat is for systems and control. All right, if we're going to have this in place, how do we set up that the tenant pays us on a monthly basis? How do we set it up so that we're able to pay our mortgage on a regular basis? Do we get a sinking fund in place so that we know that we have a budget to organise repairs and the likes of that? Do we get a triple net investment, as they say in America? Or do we get one where we pay some of the outgoings? Those are the systems that you put in place when you have your blue hat thinking on. Then you can take that hat off and put on the red one. The red one is for emotional thinking. How do you feel about this? Is it going to make you happy? Is it going to make you upset? What happens in 6 months' time if the situation changes? Are you still going to be comfortable? Are you going to sleep at night? These are the questions that a red hat thinker sort of has a look at. And then finally, you take off the red hat and you put on a yellow hat. Yellow hat is positive. It's like the opposite of the black hat thinker. Positive. Okay, so if this all went ahead, what could it look like in 2 years' time? Are we going to be in a situation where we've got like a 20% return? That sort of type thinking is what you look at. One final point, or probably two final points in regards to advisors. I remember when I first went to university, and it may have even been like the first week's of lecture, or it might have been the orientation week. One of the lecturers got up and said that he really marvels at the fact that we come into university, and that in time, because we learn so many different things, we will actually know more than most of our teachers. And that is something that we need to recognise when we're talking with advisors. Now, I can talk to my lawyer and he will give me advice, and I always make sure that he stays in his lane, stays in his swimming lane, as we say. So when he starts talking about taxation advice, it probably is that I may even know more than he does, because I've been spending a lot of time. In my particular case, I spent 10 years in the tax office. So when a lawyer starts talking to me about tax, he really wants to know what he's doing. Otherwise, I can quickly correct him. I've even had to educate quite a few accountants in regards to taxation. But you will find that as you go through life and work with different advisors, you will start to get your own library of information, and recognise that just because information comes from an advisor doesn't mean it's an expert, doesn't mean it's correct. It's just part of the consideration, part of the mix. Too many people just blindly follow their advisors. And if in doubt, and you're worried about your advisor, or you're just blindly following your advisor, ask yourself this question: do they have the lifestyle that they should have? And are they, do they have more money than you? Because if you're getting financial advice from someone who's got less money than you, or you're talking to a lawyer or an accountant who's doing 60, 70 hours a week and have been doing that for years and is going to be doing that till they're 80 or 85, you need to start asking yourself, okay, maybe take their advice with a measure of sanity, and recognise that anything outside their lane probably isn't a good field. Make sure that the people who are getting your advice are in better positions than you. We often say that we are the sum of the 5 people we hang around the most with. Now, recognising that your partner is probably one of those, you want to make sure the other 4 people are better than you, either in skill sets or in affluence, so that you know that the information that you learn from them is proven to work from there. So this video is one of the series in how to get your first commercial property in 70 days. Now, if you have been good and did your homework for the last video, which dealt in regards to shortlisting, then what you can do is you can go to your chart and you can pull off number 17. And what you can also do is pull off this video, which is number 18. So we've now just finished the 18th day on your journey on 70 days to get your first commercial property. Now, I look forward to catching up with you tomorrow, because I've got probably a bit of a heavy duty one, which is on risk management. So today we spoke about risk appetite. Tomorrow we're going to talk about managing risk and making sure that the risks associated with your investment, and every investment has risks, make sure that the associated risks in your investment are controllable and even turned around to being in your favour. All right, until tomorrow, take care and God bless. If it's Christmas in your place, I can smell the turkey cooking in mine. Have a great Christmas and a good break. Take care and God bless. This is Peter from Bundaberg Commercial.